And this case takes place in Blackpool, England on the 1st of November 2003. Charlene Downs was a 14-year-old girl who lived in Blackpool with her mother, father, brother and 2 sisters. The life of Charlene is a rather tragic one, and one that is hard to listen to, especially for those who have experienced SA. It seems that she never really had a chance in life, but we shall get into that later. An old close friend of Charlene who knew her very well described her as a lovely and caring girl. However, he said that when she was around 12 years old, her personality changed. She became more reckless and rebellious. Charlene's older sister is named Rebecca. At the time of this story taking place, she was 16 years of age. Out of all of the siblings, it's reported that Charlene and Rebecca were the closest and considered each other to be best friends. Rebecca moved out of the family home when she was 14 years old and moved into a house that was owned by a 50-year-old man. Rebecca has claimed that she and this 50-year-old man were not in a relationship. However, many who knew her at the time have stated that this is untrue and that she was indeed in a relationship with this older man. Despite moving out, Rebecca and Charlene still remained very close. Rebecca Downs had moved out of the family home as soon as she could. This was because her father, Bob Downs, was known to be incredibly violent. If his children misbehaved, he would beat them, especially if he had had a couple of beers. Also, some very, very unsavory characters would often stay at the Downs' household as guests. But we shall talk about this in depth further on. Charlene too was a victim of Bob's anger and violence. In fact, the Downs family had moved from the West Midlands to Blackpool in 1999. This was because both Karen and Bob risked losing their children as they had been investigated by the social services due to neglect, abuse, and multiple predators staying in the family's home. The authorities wanted to place the children into the care system. On the 1st of November 2003, Charlene awoke at around 10 AM. She got ready for the day and met her sister Rebecca. The two spent the day walking the streets, in the arcades, and in McDonald's. At around 6:45 PM that night, Charlene and Rebecca were walking towards Church Street, which is in Blackpool town centre. During this time, their mother, Karen Downs, was handing out leaflets for a local restaurant. The three happened to bump into each other and spoke briefly. Rebecca told Karen and Charlene that she was going home and asked Charlene if she wanted to come with her. However, Charlene said that she wanted to meet some friends instead. So, off Rebecca went alone. Karen walked with Charlene to a payphone where she called some of her friends, telling them to come and meet her. Karen stayed with Charlene until these friends arrived. Once the friends came, Karen told Charlene not to be home too late before going their separate ways. Now, what happened from this point on is a little unclear. Charlene and these friends spent some time together. She then met another friend and went to the Carousel bar situated on the North Pier. Footage would be found much later of what appears to be Charlene walking with an unidentified woman at around 9 PM. The area in which Charlene is walking was known for the selling of illegal substances and is where working women were known to hang out. Charlene then meets other friends and hangs around the town centre before making her way towards an alley on Abingdon Street. Charlene was spotted around this alleyway at around 10 to 11 PM. It was the last time she would ever be seen again. When Charlene didn't make it home that night, Karen became concerned. However, she would later claim that she didn't worry too much. Charlene was 14, an age when teenagers are known to rebel, and put this down for the reason for her not coming home on time. Hours and days would pass. Charlene's parents didn't report Charlene missing for 2 whole days. When Karen phoned the police, she stated that Charlene had been missing since 8 o'clock on the Saturday, which was the 1st of November. She reported Charlene missing on the Monday. Whilst on the phone, the police told Karen that they would send some officers over shortly to gather some information in hopes of being able to locate Charlene quickly. On the phone call, you can hear Karen reply, "I can't. I need to go out soon." To which the dispatcher replies in a shocked voice, "Your daughter is missing and she is 14. You need to stay in and speak to the police." The police went over to the Downs' household and gathered information about Charlene, who she was with when she disappeared, what she was wearing, and where she was known to hang around. At first, the police put this case down as a runaway child. They assumed that Charlene would soon turn up once she ran out of money or missed her home, but this wasn't what happened. The police contacted the local media and told them not to publish the story of Charlene's disappearance, claiming that this was just another runaway story and she would be back soon. Although, after some more time passed with no leads, Charlene's mother contacted the media and asked them to publish an article along with a recent photograph of Charlene, which the media did. This is when Karen learned that the police told the media not to publish the story. The police received a large number of calls and tips from various people, all claiming to have seen Charlene in the days since her disappearance, one even claiming that they had seen her dead by a railway track. However, the vast majority of these tips did not lead to anything of significance. It soon became apparent that something was horribly wrong. When the police questioned Karen and Bob, they discovered that living with the family was a man named Ray Monroe. As I mentioned earlier, some very unsavory characters were living in the house, and Ray was one of them. Ray is a convicted predator. He was found guilty during the time he was living with the family, and 3 days after Charlene vanished, he was sentenced and jailed after he pleaded guilty to 3 counts of indecent assault and SAing a 6-year-old boy. Ray was jailed for 4 years after pleading guilty. Bob has always insisted that he had no idea that Ray had pleaded guilty to these horrific crimes, claiming that he only found out about his crimes when he was sat in court during Ray's trial, 3 days after Charlene had disappeared. The police began to suspect that perhaps Bob and Karen had a hand in Charlene's disappearance. Investigators also discovered the reason why the Downs family had moved from the West Midlands to Blackpool. When Charlene was just 9 years of age, she had accused a friend of Bob and Karen's of forcing themselves on her, among other things. When social services became involved, Bob and Karen moved and were somehow able to slip under the radar. If Charlene were to be found, or if she ever came back, it was decided by the authorities that she would be put into the care system. However, this was never to happen. Years went by with no trace of Charlene. It also became clear to the police that Charlene, along with many other young girls, would frequent some of the local kebab shops where they would do sexual favors for the owners and workers in return for money, cigarettes, and alcohol. It's reported that Charlene had over 100 contacts. Men all over Blackpool would pay Charlene to perform acts on them for money. Charlene was one of over 60 girls in Blackpool who were being exploited by the takeaway owners who operated in a ring, amongst various other predators. The youngest of these girls was 11. However, the police would keep this quiet until 2011. The next big development would occur in 2006. A man by the name of David Cassidy came forward to the police with some information. He stated that 2 men were responsible for the murder of Charlene, Mohammed Raveshi and Ayad Albatiki. Raveshi was a 55-year-old takeaway owner and a foster parent to many children. Albatiki was 28 years old and was business partners with Raveshi. David Cassidy claimed to have heard that Raveshi had a number of young girls hanging around his home and his takeaway. David also claimed that Raveshi had been found inside his bed with 3 young naked girls, one of them being Charlene Downs. He also said he had heard that Charlene had performed oral acts on Albatiki in exchange for money. David Cassidy was described as a businessman. He had a slot machine arcade and supplied slot machines to takeaways. He was very familiar with many of the owners. The story that he told the police was that Charlene was a victim of exploitation, and that she had told Raveshi and Albatiki that she was going to the police to turn them in because she was sick of being used by them. David claimed that he received this information from Albertiki's brother. The story was that Albertiki had killed Charlene and acquired help from Raveshi to dispose of the body. Based on these accusations from David Cassidy, Albertiki and Raveshi were detained and brought in. They were questioned and asked if they knew anything about the disappearance of Charlene Downs. The two men claimed that they had no idea who Charlene even was. Whilst the two men were detained by the authorities, the police went to Ravesh's home and installed a number of secret recording devices, along with a recording device in Ravesh's car. For 4 weeks, the police listened in on private conversations. A total of 52 tapes were made over the course of the 4 weeks, and Detective Sergeant Jan Besant was the officer who volunteered to transcribe them. For 6 hours a day for almost a year, she listened to the tapes and tried to make sense of them. The recording devices in Ravesh's home were planted right near the television set, so static was picked up. This resulted in the audio being extremely poor quality. It's important to note that Jan had no qualifications to make her an expert in transcribing poor quality audio and had no knowledge of linguistic analysis. When speaking about what she heard in the tapes, Jan said, "In the first few tapes, clearly they were shocked and worried and panicking. The first thing they talk about is this murder inquiry." In the recordings, Jan heard the two men talking about a burial place and big bones. A small piece of the transcript is on screen now. In one of the recordings, Jan believes she hears Raveshi say, "I can't cope. I'm so worried, and you were the one who killed her." Raveshi then asks, "Why did you kill her?" Albertiki replies saying, "You're being stupid if you thought we'd ever release her." Albertiki was also heard asking how long fingerprints last, to which Raveshi responds, "There is nothing left of her. She was here, she died, there really is nothing." Jan also claimed to hear the two men joking about how they had minced up Charlene's body, turned her into kebab meat, and served her flesh to unwitting customers. The two men were arrested and charged with the murder of Charlene Downs. The police spoke with Charlene's parents, Bob and Karen. They informed them of the arrest and told them they were 99% certain that Charlene had been murdered, although they didn't actually tell them about the way in which they believed she had been killed. The Downs family would find out when the media began running stories about the murder of Charlene, stating rumours that she had been chopped up and sold as kebab meat. Before telling the Downs family about these disturbing rumours, they had instead fed the media this information for them to distribute. This, of course, was an incredible shock to the family. It goes without saying that the headlines gripped the public. The story of a teenage girl being turned into kebab meat and being cannibalized by unwitting customers spread quickly. The trial would begin in May of 2006. The audio was presented to the court, with a transcription going alongside, informing the court of what the men were saying, along with their witness, David Cassidy. Raveshi owned a number of properties in Blackpool. In his main residence, the investigators looked for any DNA evidence or blood that could prove that Charlene was either there or had been killed there. The prosecution team showed evidence and photographs of the home, showing that a number of floorboards had been replaced very recently, along with other renovations to the house. Investigators had also noted that the place was unusually clean, like it had been scrubbed. No DNA evidence was found that belonged to Charlene. Albertiki and Ravesh's defense team managed to convince the judge that David's testimony was merely hearsay and was not reliable, pointing to the fact that David had a long criminal history. The audio quality of the recordings was also contested. The defense argued that it was too unclear to be a reliable piece of evidence. The judge agreed that the transcript could only be cited as an interpretation and not as fact. The defense team also pushed that the recordings and the transcripts did not match up and that Jan wanted to solve the case so badly that she inserted what she wanted to hear into the transcriptions and were made to fit the narrative. For instance, the words burial place were mistranscribed. What was likely said was Paul's place. A tracker was placed on Raveshi's car. When the police checked to see where Raveshi had gone since the tracker had been placed on his car, they confirmed that he had actually visited his friend Paul. No such burial site was ever visited by Raveshi. However, what is rather odd is that both men were indeed talking about the disposal of big bones. Linguistic experts later confirmed that they were talking about bones, and were joking about mincing somebody up in the kebab meat. Both men denied any wrongdoing and proclaimed their innocence. There was no evidence that either of the men had ever met Charlene. Then, a very damning piece of evidence was presented that shattered the prosecution's claims. Investigators had wired up David and gotten him to speak to Albertiki's brother again. Albertiki's brother being the one who told David about this whole story. David did as he was asked and spoke with Albertiki's brother about the alleged murder of Charlene. In this recording, the brother this time claimed that he had no idea what David was talking about. At the end of the recording, David says to the brother, "I must have gotten the wrong end of the stick." With these holes in the prosecution's evidence, the case fell through and resulted in a hung jury, meaning that the jury could not all collectively agree whether or not the two men were innocent or guilty. So, they were released. The Downs family were outraged. They believed that the two men were guilty of murdering Charlene, and they still do. However, it was discovered that the two men knew some of the jury members, and so a retrial was set for 2008. But the Crown Prosecution Service found no evidence against the two men, and so this retrial was called off. Because it was claimed that the two men were falsely accused and falsely imprisoned, they both were given £250,000 each in compensation. Although, both men faced further accusations following the trial, with Albertiki being accused of SAing 5 young women and Raveshi being accused of abusing a young girl. Neither men were found guilty of any of these crimes. Following the trial, the police were investigated for what was seen as their major mishandling of evidence. It was found that many of the officers were untrained, incompetent, and held strong biases towards the two men. Because of Jan's alleged misinterpretations of the audio, she was ordered to resign following this investigation. In 2007, the police finalized a report about the grooming of young girls by a number of takeaway owners and workers. However, as I said earlier, this only came to light in 2011. In this report, it was said that Charlene had performed oral in exchange for food. The number of girls mentioned in this report was around 60. However, this could be a lot higher. Many of these girls were incredibly vulnerable, coming from abusive homes and many in the care system. Now, let's delve a little deeper into the Downs family. A week after the trial had ended, Karen took a knife and stabbed Bob. Bob survived and refused to press charges against Karen, stating that she was just under a lot of pressure due to the trial collapsing. Rumours had been circulating that Bob had been allowing men to have relations with his children in exchange for money. Bob was described as an alcoholic. One theory was that he allowed his children to be used in exchange for money. On many occasions, convicted predators had been found living or staying in Karen and Bob's house. Bob would often go out drinking and invite random men back to the house for more drinks. Allow me to quickly go through some very strange allegations made against Bob and Karen. A leaked court document from 1989 shows that the Downs family had been investigated by the West Midlands Police and the social services. This was because a convicted predator had been found to be giving their 3-year-old daughter Emma rides in his car. In 1999, it was alleged that some of Bob's friends engaged in inappropriate behaviour with some of the Downs' children. In April of 2001, Charlene told a social worker that one of Bob's friends had touched her inappropriately. In August of 2001, Charlene was found by a social worker lying in bed with a man in his 60s. This incident occurred in the Downs' home in Blackpool. Charlene was then later seen counting some money. And of course, before Charlene vanished, the man I mentioned earlier, Ray Monroe, was living with the family. It's reported that many people saw Charlene sitting on Ray's lap inside the Downs' family home. At least 16 males who have committed various offences involving children have had access to the Downs' family home in the West Midlands and in Blackpool over a 15-year period. It's entirely possible that it's more than 16. I do have to make this clear, these are all allegations. Although it is confirmed that Charlene attended a health clinic 12 times, it was noted that she had bruises to her private area on multiple occasions. Karen was aware of these visits to the clinic, however she claimed that she never thought much of it. Charlene's blood was also found in the Downs' household. However, this is something that can be expected, as of course she did live there. I've also seen some reports that claim that the Downs family did not fully cooperate with the police during the beginning of the investigation. The theory is that Bob allowed men to come back to his home, where he would allow these men to have access to his children in exchange for money, so he could buy more booze. One of these men may have either deliberately or accidentally killed Charlene, and the parents helped to cover up her death to save themselves. Some people think that Bob may have killed Charlene in a fit of rage. Both Bob and Karen deny having any part in the disappearance of Charlene. A number of other suspects have been questioned by the police over the years. However, nothing has ever come of it. The most recent suspect is a man named Nigel Lloyd. It's said that Nigel knew the Downs family and Charlene. Nigel is a 51-year-old convicted predator. He was found guilty of attacking 2 young girls between 2001 and 2003 in Blackpool, which was around the time when Charlene was walking the streets. There are also some rumours that the two spoke on the night that Charlene went missing. Nigel's flat also overlooked the alley near the takeaways where Charlene was known to frequent. Nigel was recently arrested and questioned. However, nothing ever came of this either. So, what exactly happened to Charlene Downs? Do you think Albertiki and Raveshi were responsible? Although the recordings were somewhat debunked, many parts of the audio are still very suspicious. Regardless, many people, including the police, believe the 2 men to be extremely dangerous. Or do you think that the parents had anything to do with her death? The case of Charlene is incredibly tragic. Reading about her early childhood made me feel sick to my stomach. I can already feel that some people will judge Charlene for her behaviour, but I do think it's important to remember and to take into account what she went through when she was younger and the kinds of people who were allowed to live in her home. Detective Chief Superintendent Andy Webster has said, "We remain fully committed to finding Charlene's killer and her body. A £100,000 reward remains on offer for information leading to the conviction of her killers or the recovery of her body. If you do know anything about the murder of Charlene Downs, please see the relevant links in the pinned comment." Investigators have taken more than 4,800 witness statements and followed 10,500 lines of inquiry. But the case still remains unsolved. As of the release of this video, Charlene has been missing for just shy of 20 years.